Hi everyone. I'm going to give you some quick background before discussion of revising the maritime forest indicators. First, start with basically what your cooperative does. And so this is the mission of your cooperative over the next year or so is creating a shared blueprint for conservation actions for natural and cultural resources. So you see the geography there. And so these indicators are really the building blocks for the next revision of the South Atlantic blueprint. So here we are back on the steps in the blueprint, and so we've gone through the first run of setting some indicators and targets, the state of those indicators, and then we have a first version of the conservation blueprint. So version 1.0 is out right now, and so now we're going back to revising and updating our indicators and targets. So that's where we're at here. A reminder about the broad goals of the cooperative. So we have these three pillars here: the natural resources, the cultural, and the socioeconomic resources. Within the maritime forest, we're particularly going to be talking about the natural resources side of things. And at this point, it's really all about the integrity of the ecological systems. So there's also a caveat that at some point, if the integrity isn't enough, we may need to think about the viability of certain key species. But at this point, the indicators are really all about integrity of the ecosystem. Here's a series of 11 ecosystems for the South Atlantic, so maritime forest being one. And so for each of these, we have a series of indicators, no more than 3, that add up to the integrity of that system. For the original indicators, you're probably part of this process yourself, but in case you weren't, they're based on detailed input from a whole mess of experts in the different ecosystems of the South Atlantic, including folks from the surrounding LCCs on the chances that that indicator may be able to be shared across LCC boundaries. Okay, so that's a very quick background here, the indicators. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the indicator testing so far. So with respect to all the indicators, we have 3 different types of criteria. So these were set up in the original indicator process and also in the revision process that was approved by the steering committee a little more than a year back there. So we've got practical criteria. So this is all about, can we actually model and monitor these things across the entire South Atlantic area? Ecological criteria. Are they actually representing other components of the ecosystem that we care about? And then the social criteria, basically, how well do they resonate with the American public, with private land and water managers, with public land and water managers, those kind of measures. So here's basically how they're being tested so far. For the practical criteria, at least for this year, really, the practical test has been your staff here in the cooperative creating or using existing GIS layers to depict them. So can we actually model them? Okay, well, let's go do it for the whole area. For the ecological criteria, there are different teams depending on what ecosystem you're talking about. For the terrestrial side, which covers the maritime forest, we've got Ricky White from NatureServe and Ashton Drew from NC State. We've been working on testing some of the ecological criteria. And then on the social criteria, we had a class from Duke of master students actually take on some of the questions about how well different types of indicators might resonate with the American public. So we were originally planning to even start on the social criteria until a few years out, but that was a lucky accident that they decided to help out. All right, so the practical criteria so how well are our current maritime forest indicators doing here? So one of the measures we have, acres in protected status. So that passed. We managed to actually, so we can model that. And the abundance of painted bunting is basically a fail for now. We thought the current bird models we have are actually not really depicting the components of the how abundance of painted bunting varies across maritime forest. In fact, it treats all maritime forests as the same. So this particular layer for painted bunting isn't quite working. So the painted bunting was originally intended to capture some structural attributes within maritime forests. it's not doing it, so that fails for now. The other one, the acres and protected forests, and we'll talk about this a little bit on the call, and you'll notice in the sheet itself. It did pass. We can model it, but acres and protected status, including that protected status modifier, is not necessarily getting us intuitively what you would expect, because you can lose a lot of land outside of protected status and it won't affect the indicator. So we'll talk about that in the call and some recommendations for a tiny tweak on that measure. All right, so this leaves us, as far as maritime forest integrity, if we take out the painted bunting, which we can't model, it leaves us with these four sort of measures capturing the integrity. So the top three actually come from the landscape indicators, which drape over all of the terrestrial ecosystems, and the bottom one comes out from the actual maritime forest itself. So we have these low road density areas, kind of getting at the sort of bigger chunks of natural habitat. Structural connectivity, so how overall our habitat's connected. So maritime forest that's part of a corridor of multiple habitat types would get higher integrity than ones that are isolated. Climate resilient biodiversity hotspots. So these are unique geophysical features, sort of combinations of soil type and diversity of features that seem to be depicting where a lot of biodiversity is and will be into the future. We can talk more about that on the call if you're interested in getting more into that. And also the acres of maritime forest measure that we talked about before. So this is where we stand right now with the different measures of integrity, given those recommended tweaks. All right, so we're also been testing ecological criteria. So this question of, are they indicators representing other species and ecological features? So we've been testing indicators, second tier indicators, so things that, through the indicator process didn't quite make it as measures for one reason or another, either we couldn't monitor them well or they just didn't cover the whole geography. And also indicators suggested by the web community. So if you remember, if you had looked, we asked everyone, what other things would you like to see tested in these ecosystems? And so we've been looking at overlap of those. And the challenge for a lot of stuff is sampling is opportunistic for a lot of the species and attributes. So we have a lot of known locations, can't say much about where they aren't, but we can say a lot about whether things overlap. So all this is going to be done in a year. We're just making some tweaks on some of the maritime forest testing, so I'll try to talk about that on the call in a couple days. But basically, we looked at how well these things covered things like, presence and presence of large live oaks and DBH of large live oaks and a few other potential metrics of maritime forest health. I'm not going to talk about those this time. We'll hit that on the call. And then also on the social criteria, so this is a project done by these students at Duke. So they went out and actually sort of intercept sampling, so hitting individuals from a broad set of different sort of diverse demographics and socioeconomics classes. They worked both around the Research Triangle and coastal North Carolina. And so actually these are where the respondents came from. There's actually a few hundred different surveys. And so they then tested some of these different types of indicators. So here's an example from beaches and dunes habitat. And so looking at by willingness to donate money. So ask the question, okay, would you rather donate money to protect beach dune habitat, which is in orange, versus nesting sea turtles, which is in blue? And also there's sort of a neither category that we gave folks as well. So this was sort of looking at, well, what types of these indicators are resonating most? So in this case, it wasn't necessarily a clear-cut, general habitat versus species, which was resonating most. These are also the top 5 environmental issues respondents felt are important. So this is out of an N of 100 people that answered this particular question. And so you can see here, clearly on the top of people's list, air pollution, air quality, water pollution, water quality. It's definitely interesting to see as much interest in the air quality. Usually the water is a pretty obvious one. So this is the breakdown of what's on people's minds, at least in central and eastern North Carolina, where they did some of the work. Okay, so now to this process of revising the indicator. So how is this all working for the different systems? So this is the monthly schedule, so you all should know at least, maritime force is in June. This is how things stretch out across the entire month for the different ecosystems, 1 to 2 per month. Beginning of the week, forming out teams, sending out potential revisions for discussion. So this is the stuff we get out through the newsletter every month. And also get all the indicator models up on the Planning Atlas, so you can take a look at the actual geospatial depictions of them. Week 3, sending out the testing results. We're a little late on this one. We'll do it on the call for some of the different testing, and then also trying to have the team calls either the 3rd or the 4th week of the month. Having some additional discussion, final decisions by the teams in the 4th week, and then basically by the end of the month, we send the team's conclusions out for a 2-week comment period. So we sort of leave it open for anyone to comment on. If you have any other tweaks, or anyone that wasn't part of the team can sort of comment. And then by the end of 2 weeks after the month, that's when we get final steering committee approval, and those are all revised for that ecosystem. Okay, so that's it for the quick update. Now I want to show you real quickly, for those that haven't done it, where to access some more information on the gory details about mapping and the indicators and stuff like that. So we're going to go in here. So now we're on the South Atlantic LCC website. So we're going to go into the indicator page here. And so we'll go ahead and go to help improve the indicators. You can also scroll down. And so here we are, Maritime Forest, read the details. So I sent this out to y'all earlier. Just a heads up, please take a look at that. Please take a look at some of the details, because some of the questions may come up. So you click on read the details here. It sends you to this document, gives you an overview, and will tell you about the testing of the specific indicators, sort of practical criteria. So here are the 2, acres and protected status, abundance of painted bunting, recommended changes. And for any of these, you can then go for the GIS layers, click here to view. This will open up the layer in the Conservation Planning Atlas. So when you first hit here, you'll see on the right, here's the description. You can hit more if you want to see more details. So if you want to see all the gory details of the mapping steps, exactly how the GIS layers were produced, you can go in and take a look at that. You can also open that data set in a particular map. And so then here we've loaded up the maritime forest layer. You want to see where the actual sort of acres of maritime forest comes from. So this is going to load up, and then for any of these you can zoom in and see. And for this one in particular, since maritime forests are small little pixels, at first you look at it and you go, oh no, there's no maritime forest. But once you actually zoom in a little bit to some of these areas, the actual maritime forest stuff will start becoming apparent in the layers in green. So it just takes a little while to load it up. So you've got some of those layers up here. So this is showing some of the depictions of where those are. All right, so that is it. So please, if you have time, now you've seen that, if you have extra time, take a look at that overview if you want to play around with some data sets. And if you have any other concerns prior to the call that you think of that you want to let me know, just feel free to send me an email. Otherwise, looking forward to talking with you soon.